So in this video, I assign the ISA the much coveted God tier status when it comes to building overall wealth. But all of this can go completely awry if you end up using the wrong provider. So in this video, we're going to be going through some of the best stocks and shares ISA providers in the UK. And then I'll be ranking these various ISAs on my proprietary ISA ranking scoreboard. At the end of the video, we're going to be going through two things. The first is going to be, I'm a former investment analyst and these are the platforms that I use. And then the second thing is going to be a 4-step process to decipher which of these platforms is going to be best for you. But before we get into it, I should mention this is not necessarily financial advice, this is for information only. The value of your investments can go up and down, but all of the providers that we'll discuss in this video are FCA regulated and therefore covered by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme of up to £85,000 per individual per broker. So I think this is maybe the most important part of the video because it really distills everything that we've talked about so far. So we're going to start off with a strong contender, which is Trading 212. Now Trading 212 has been around for a few years now, but I think it's really right up there with some of the absolute champions, some of the heavyweights in this industry, and that's for a few main reasons. The first is that they have over 13,000 potential investable funds and securities which you can invest in. That covers ETFs, that covers index funds, that covers, and importantly, individual shares of companies. So it's off to a really good start. But the key thing, and as I mentioned, fees are the enemy. The key thing which I think Trading 212 really gets right is their fees. Now, if you look here, they basically have an FX fee of 0.15%, but you can, for the most part, trade pretty freely and not incur any fees. But even their FX fee, when you compare to other providers in the UK, is kind of really competitive, truth be told. But if you want to buy shares denominated in a currency other than in pounds, you will have to pay this 0.15% fee. So if you want to buy shares in Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, whatever, they're all denominated in dollars, so you will have to pay the exchange fee. Now, one of the things that I do like about this is every time you go in to place an order, it does actually show you the amount of fee that you're going to get charged. It's not just some thing that gets deducted at the end of the month. So I think whilst there are fees there, they are transparent about them, or what few fees that they have, they are actually transparent about them. But when you start to look at the overall reviews, you really start to kind of really identify why this is such a strong contender in this area. So when it comes to variety of funds for Trading 212, I think it's right up there. Not only have you got individual shares, ETFs, index funds, you've just got a plethora of managed funds as well. So it's a green for this one. Next is fees. As we've said, they have really competitive fees. You only really pay the FX fee, you pay a deposit fee, but there are ways around this. So again, another good one. The app, I think the app is up there. Best in class app as far as I'm concerned. Very intuitive, very easy to use, very easy to navigate. And as I mentioned, transparency when it comes to the fees. So it's a real green one there. And finally, the option for other accounts. This is probably one of the drawbacks. A lot of the other providers that we're going to be talking about in future have SIPs, they have general accounts, they have other accounts which are available, and Trading 212 doesn't really have them. So it's probably really the only area where I would mark Trading 212 down. Next is Vanguard. Now, I must say, Vanguard, as I've mentioned in other videos, is one of the providers that I use. I've got junior ISAs for my kids, I've got SIPs, I've got an ISA there for me, an ISA there and a SIP there for my wife. So it's a platform that we use really quite a lot. And the founding principle of John Bogle, who founded Vanguard, was that fees were the devil. Kudos to him. Fees were the devil and they should be reduced at every conceivable opportunity. And the truth of the matter is, when you start to look into an awful lot of these high-flying hedge funds that offer these absolutely stellar returns, I think it's also worth noting that they tend to do well in up markets when everyone's doing well, kind of rising tide lifts all boats. And I think for the most part, it's been reasonably well proven that actually a lot of these actively managed funds, after you take into account fees, just can't even catch up with an index fund. So this is something that Vanguard really focuses on. Something like their S&P 500 fund, which I personally invest quite heavily in, has got a OCF, an ongoing charge fee of 0.07%. So their focus on fees is really encouraging. But all of this comes at a cost, unfortunately, for Vanguard, which is if you sign up to Vanguard, if you're in the US, they have a plethora of potential investing options. But in the UK, they only really have a few options, which are going to be funds which they actively manage. So now, I should just mention at this stage that it's a pretty reasonable statement to say that the only thing you really need to invest in is a global low-cost index fund. So do you really need anything over and above that? Conceivably not, but we're going to go into more detail about this at the end. But you only have Vanguard funds. Now, these include their life strategy funds, they include their target retirement account funds, which are more actively managed and have slightly higher fees. But you know what? In terms of fund choices, it doesn't rate too highly. Is it all you need? up to you. But I think the key thing with Vanguard is they have actively tried to expand the overall fund offering that we have in the UK. So whilst the selection may not be that great at the moment, I think it is something that will get better in future. But there is one thing which I think we probably should mention, and that is Vanguard is one of the largest funds in the world, managing trillions of dollars. So you could make a pretty reasonable case that actually the fees are pretty competitive. They're not the absolute best, but they're reasonably competitive. But you are backed by a behemoth, an absolute Goliath in the investing world. So are the fees that you get potentially, is it worth it for that extra security? Conceivably, I think you can make a pretty reasonable case there. So let's go through our list. In terms of variety of funds, it's got to be a red on this one. I just don't think they're up there. And when you look at some of the other platforms we're going to look at later on in the video, I think you're going to struggle to make a case there. Fees, I think the fees are still very competitive. They do have some bits and bobs in there which are a bit more expensive. For the most part, I don't think they're worth it, and it's not something that I invest my money in. They are online only. Now, just a quick one on this. Whilst I would generally say this is a bad thing, it depends on your overall personality and your overall investing strategy. If you are naturally a worrier, then having something on your phone where you can check the value of your ISA 82,000 times a day, probably not worth it, but it's going to be a red nonetheless. And finally, other account options. You know what? As I mentioned before, I have basically everything with Vanguard. Junior ISAs, SIP, blah, 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 pensions, blah, 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 absolutely everything. So it is helpful from that perspective. So Vanguard, I'd keep a lookout. Next is InvestEngine. So InvestEngine's a bit of a funny one. Whilst I think, for the most part, I rate InvestEngine. I think they offer a really good service. The fees are very competitive. We'll go into a bit more detail, but you can only really invest in funds. You have about 600 that you can invest in, so the choice is slightly higher than Vanguard. But I would view their competition really as being Trading 212, and Trading 212 have got like 13,000. So for the most part, I don't know, I just don't think, it feels like they're somewhere in the middle. They have more than Vanguard, but that's not really their competition, but they've got way less than Trading 212. But you start to look at the fees, and this is where it kind of starts to make a lot more sense. They charge particularly low fees, but one thing you will notice is that in their comparison tables, they tend to not compare themselves to Trading 212. So an interesting omission there. So whilst the fees are low, great, have at it. I think it makes a lot of sense. But gradually, I think those fees are going to start to tick up. Now, having said that, there are some fantastic introductory offers, which if you start to really take advantage of, they can start to make a pretty big difference. You can get, and just on that, if you're transferring over an ISA, you have this sliding scale, so you can gradually increase the amount of effectively cashback you'll get depending on the size of the portfolio that you're transferring over, and it can get up into like thousands of pounds. So not a bad sign-up bonus. But it does sort of remind me of like when Spotify used to be free. It's kind of, it was for a bit, and now it's not, and now it's only getting more expensive. See what I mean? So where do I rate this one? On variety of funds, I don't know. So on variety of funds, I'm going to have to give it a red. I just don't feel like it's really up there with where it should be. In terms of fees, it's a green. They are really good on fees. I think it's one of the most important areas. The app, again, not quite as good as Trading 212. I think it is reasonably easy to use. I like the functionality where you can create effectively a fund of funds. So I think that's worth having. But in terms of other options to invest in, it is kind of limited, and so I think this will be something they will hold it back. Hopefully with all this additional money that they're raising, these additional funding rounds will lead to this extra functionality. So SIPs, junior ISAs, junior SIPs, all that sort of thing. Next is Freetrade. So Freetrade I find to be a bit frustrating. Again, app is pretty good. It's not the best, but it's reasonably intuitive to use. But I think one of the problems that Freetrade has is they end up in this kind of weird middle ground where they're not quite competing with Trading 212, but you still have to pay monthly. So let's just work on this for a sec. If you look at what the fees are monthly, if you're investing, say, hundreds or a couple of £1,000s a month into your ISA, then these fees might seem kind of small. But if you are someone who's investing like 50 quid a month, which is still worth doing, or 100 quid a month, then actually paying this sort of money in fees can start to feel, it feels like it's a bit much. And one thing that I find to be really annoying, and I know why companies do this, is to sort of dangle, but if you paid a bit more money every month, and they dangle these potential options in front of you. And I think doing things like paywalling certain companies, so not being able to invest in certain big tech American companies, is really annoying. Really, really annoying. Gold stars, A pluses all round. I think it does a really good job actually of easily showing all the possible options. The fees are still quite low, but as I say, it may be the case that they do increase over time, and there is kind of a lack of other products that are available, so we'll give this one a red. Hargreaves Landsdown. Now, Hargreaves Landsdown is like living in a Tesco Express and then having your eyes open to the world of Costco. If you know, you know. The number of potential things that you can invest in with Hargreaves Landsdown is absolutely bewildering. There is stuff all over the place. But the downside of all that choice is fees. Fees abound absolutely everywhere. Now, when you start to look at some of the trading fees, you start to look at how some of the fees are structured based on the size of your portfolio. I think invariably what you come away with is, if you have a lot of money invested, if you're a very sophisticated investor, then I think Hargreaves Landsdown to some degree does make sense. But for a kind of middle of the road or beginner investor or just a casual investor, it's maybe not going to be the ideal platform for you to be looking at. And for the most part, I don't necessarily know that they market themselves as being a competitor to Trading 212. So it's kind of hard to assess on that basis. But you also pay every time you want to trade. So again, it feels as though they're addressing almost entirely different markets. The difference between, like, you know, a Trading 212 is for a new beginner, whereas a Hargreaves Landsdown is for an absolutely professional investor, someone who has a lot of money to be investing and they have all of these potential things that they want to invest their money into. So whilst to some degree maybe the illustration there is to try and say, we are sophisticated investors and we know what we're doing, that's why it's maybe more expensive, but I don't know. One thing I would say, they do have lots of free resources that are available. They do have lots of news and information on their app. The app is not like, it's fine. It's not great. So, you know, if we go through the list, app I would say is a red. Choice of things to invest in, absolutely vast. So it's a firm green. It's a red on the fees because it is expensive. But I think one of the things that really does claw it back for me is, not only do they have lots of things you can invest in, but they also have lots of products available. So you can have your junior SIPs, your junior ISAs, your SIPs, your ISAs, general investment accounts. Like, they do everything. So that for me is the thing which kind of claws it all back for Hargreaves Landsdown. Interactive Investor. Now, they don't suffer from this problem. They are a UK-based company. They're based up in Manchester, I think. And so they don't suffer from being based in the US and trying to be made to fit or to service consumers in the UK. They are UK based from the off, and I think that means that they have way more customizable or way more tailored experiences to UK investors, which is great. But just immediately off the bat, look at the complexity of their fee structure. Like, that's insane. You could descend into absolute madness trying to work out this fee structure. So it is just something to bear in mind, that I think for the most part it is complicated. Maybe if you're trading just on your ISA, then it's not too bad, but it feels like it's very, very complicated. In my view, the thing that really sets apart Interactive Investor is their SIP offerings. Their SIP fees are extremely competitive. They've got a good choice of funds. So it does feel like there is something there. Maybe you have your ISA someplace else, but you have your SIP with Interactive Investor. You know, I think there's potentially some value in it there. The app is also reasonably easy to use, not that intuitive, but it's got some pretty good features. So I think this is maybe the most important part of the video, because it really distills everything that we've talked about so far. And that is, how are you going to find a platform that works for you? So I think there's a few key questions that you really need to ask yourself, and then pick your platform based on your responses to those questions. So the first is, how much money have you got to invest? Now, the reason why this is so important is that a lot of fees, like in the case of Vanguard, cap out at certain fund values. And so if you're over that value, then it can be a really, you know, economical and competitive way to be able to invest your money. The next is your risk appetite. So it's very well documented that trading in individual shares of individual companies is more risky. Now, it can lead you to greater overall returns, but it is risky nonetheless. And so if you actually don't want to take that level of risk, you have no interest in trading for companies individually, you just want to buy index funds, you want to buy ETFs, then why do you need to have a provider that offers that functionality? So that is historically where Vanguard has had a very good reputation when it comes to very low cost index funds. So that's another thing to bear in mind. The third thing you need to think about is, how often are you going to trade? Are you going to deposit money? You know, do you get paid weekly and you want to do it that as part of your payday routine? Video on such a topic would be here. It's just another thing to bear in mind, and that's because some of these, like for example Hargreaves Landsdown, you have trading fees which you have to pay every time you want to trade. So if you're going to make like an annual, just it gets to the new tax year and you're just like boom, drop all your money in one go, then that can make a bit more sense. If you get paid weekly and you're going to make contributions on that basis, then it's another thing to think about. So where would I rate each of these providers overall? This is based on my own personal feedback and my own personal opinion on it. Well, I think to the S tier, the godlike category has to go to Trading 212. They have very low fees. They have a really broad range of potential investment opportunities. Their app is very easy to use. You can trade in a general account, but you can also have an ISA. I think it's really, really great. You know, this is like the god tier. Now, closely followed in second is, I would say, this is like maybe an S, maybe an A grade, is going to be InvestEngine. InvestEngine doesn't have quite as many potential opportunities for you to invest as Freetrade, and I think that's really where it gets knocked down. But, you know, my initial reservation is that fees are gradually going to increase. In the kind of A/B category is Vanguard. Now, whilst they have worked to increase their funds, I think historically one of the founding principles of John Bogle was that people should be charged very low fees. And so it is I can't explain how insane it is that to buy a Vanguard fund through a competitor is cheaper than to buy a Vanguard fund through Vanguard themselves. Like, that is insane. That really feels as though that's the sort of thing that they need to be on top of. So for that reason, that's the thing that makes me want to nudge it down a little bit to a B. But let's keep it A grade for now. I think A grade is perfectly fine. It is still an absolute stalwart for most people when it comes to investing, and I think it is a well-deserved reputation. Another B grade, Interactive Investor. I think the choice is pretty good. The app is reasonable. B grade seems reasonable. On the C grade, I would say we have Freetrade. They are catering to quite different audiences, so it's not really my bag. Maybe this is my selfishness shining through, but it's not really my sort of thing. And then on the D grade, I would say we have Hargreaves Landsdown. And that is mostly because the fees are very, very high, like very, very high. If you have a lot of money and you're a sophisticated investor, then I think fine, it makes some sense for you. If you're going to be trading in vast quantities of money, then a $5.99 trading fee is probably, if your trade is like 100 grand, then like, who cares? But I think just quickly on this, and that is one thing, all of this doesn't matter. Which platform, which this, which that, which funds, or blah, blah, blah. The main thing is finding a trading platform that works for you, finding a trading platform which suits your individual needs, which makes economic sense, which does everything that you want it to do. Because at the end of the day, you're here, you're watching this video, and you've decided to start investing. You have started to take one of the most important steps, one of the steps which most people will not take when it comes to pursuing longer term wealth and financial freedom. So maybe you think I'm talking absolute bobbins. Entirely conceivable. I have the IQ of, you know, a cartoon villain, for example. If you cracked my head open, there wouldn't be enough brain inside to cover a small water biscuit. So find one that works for you, invest accordingly, invest consistently, and as long as you are investing, that's the main thing. And so for those that want to know what I do as a former investment analyst, well, the short answer is the majority of my portfolio sits within my Vanguard account. It's basically it's where I've got everything, so it's to some degree it's convenience, but also I tend to buy very low cost country specific or region specific index funds, so S&P 500 or low cost global index fund. And so I think for the most part, for most people, I still think Vanguard is a really, really good option to go for. And that's because whilst I have I appreciate that this feels a bit contradictory. Whilst I think Trading 212 is better as a platform, I think that for most people, Vanguard is a better platform overall. And that's because, as I mentioned, most people don't really need to trade individual companies. Most people don't need a really good app. Most people, for 99% of people, just being able to go onto the website, set up a monthly deposit of a fixed amount that they just know will go into that every single month, and they can check in on the value of it occasionally. It's all you need. It's all you need, really. So I use Vanguard for that, and then for being able to trade in individual stocks, it is my preference to use Trading 212, as for all the reasons that I've mentioned. Obviously, this is the first tax year when you can put money into multiple ISA accounts, so take advantage of it. I think that's really going to be the way to go this year. So in this video, we've talked about some of the most prominent trading platforms for stocks and shares ISA based here in the UK. I've given an overall ranking to them, and I've dived into some detail about fees and apps, and we have this. This is the sum of the whole video. So thanks very much for watching. This is the third video in our ISA series. Make sure you check out all of our other videos on the ISA series, and make sure you subscribe. We've got loads of new videos coming out, including possibly the most comprehensive and the most detailed video when it comes to how to start investing. That is on the way. Peace.